So how are all these tactics going to affect ongoing trade negotiations, if there are any actual negotiations going on? Our next guest says a trade deal unlikely before the elections. With us now at Post 9, CNBC contributor Michelle Caruso-Cabrera. Why unlikely before the elections?
Well, I think this works for President Trump, right? And he's got bipartisan support from Democrats and Republicans to be tough on China. And plus, I think that the administration was quite upset when the Chinese pulled back, tried to extract more concessions. That's not what they wanted to do. If there was going to be a deal at some point, that's when it was going to happen. And now, off to the races to figure out what happens next. But I think it's going to be tough. You know,
we were talking earlier with Jim, of course, as we often do in the mornings, Carl and myself, about what is next, what conceivably will come in terms of a Chinese response, the rise of nationalism as well in China, and frankly in this country also, people proposing things as like preventing them from listing IPOs here at the New York Stock Exchange.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Wouldn't surprise you. I mean, do you sense, based on the conversations you're having, that this could go well beyond sort of a tit for tat in terms of dollars and cents?
Absolutely. This is a full court press about Chinese behavior. The markets desperately want a deal, and I understand that. But the White House desperately wants to change Chinese behavior. Those are two different things, and the first doesn't necessarily lead to the second, right? So you have two different, and then you have factions within the White House, right, that would like a deal versus changing as much Chinese behavior as you possibly could, right? So that's why I think that we're at this point where you think it's going to be until the election.
So any deal now for additional soybeans or purchases of equipment,
that's not going to be
that's
enough.
Dead, right? I mean, that would
that's not enough.
Get laughed at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was already laughed at once, right? No, they want absolutely more.
The White House had been promoting the idea of a large purchase of ag.
Right. But the Hawks are much more in ascendance now, right? The Lighthisers, the Navarros of the world are much more in power at the moment. And it stems very much from that moment where the White House thought they had a deal. They thought the Chinese pulled back, and now all bets were off.
Here's one thing I've heard. This year is the anniversary of Tiananmen Square. It's also the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic. Mm-hmm. So does that make it harder for Xi to make concessions because of this nationalistic celebration they're going to have?
I think those celebrations are an outpouring of what Xi is, right? Those celebrations are going to be bigger because of who he is and the way he thinks, right? I mean, he doesn't look at his economy, I think, oh, should we have more government intervention or less government intervention, more market forces, less market forces? It's more like, how do I stay in power? How does the Communist Party stay in power? And that's his prism, right? That's why he went after corruption, to get to his enemies and also to try to legitimize the party, etc.
But the two things that could interfere on the U.S. side are the economy and the markets.
Yep.
And so far, all okay on that front, but if there is a sharp collapse of confidence, or if this really looks like a protracted thing that can drag down the economy, wouldn't the White House then change their tune?
Possibly. So when you go back to December and the world was falling apart in the markets, right? And the conventional wisdom was, oh, look how nervous the markets are about China. But remember, happening at the same time was a much more hawkish Federal Reserve. The Fed is giving the president a lot more breathing room now with their stance. So he's got a lot more wiggle room here when it comes to, look at the market. What's the market response been? Even as this has gotten, it's not like December.
No,
what do we got?
We got 3.5%.
No, I think that was a Fed tantrum.
If you had told people this,
tantrum.
I think a month ago, that we would only be down this much, that was the discount in the market for things going completely awry.
Market's down like 4% from the highs.
Important. Psychologically, it's important. But remember how much trade we did with China last year? $800 billion. We're a $19 trillion economy. It's not that big on a macro level. For individual companies that have to do business there, that have a supply chain there, yes, it's a big deal.
All right, so is it about what gets subtracted from growth, or is it the slowdown in growth? Because we know China growth is a third of global growth.
Sure. But here's the thing, Carl. Everything they do right now slows down their growth, right? All the things we're encouraging them to do would improve their growth. I mean, that's the irony of all this,
That's
right?
larger than $800 billion in trade.
Yeah, for sure. And, I end up spending most of my time thinking about this through the prism of national security. Like, what trade-offs do we want to make in this world right now, right? And the administration's making very clear that 5G concerns them, and it's going to be full court press, right? I think when you talk about the Sprint deal, the T-Mobile deal, I wonder if there isn't a thick overlay of that about 5G.
Well, they've made the theme very important, and that's why the FCC, in part, certainly has signed on.
You know these rumors you keep hearing about the nationalization of the 5G network?
Yeah.
That comes from fears that the major telecom providers in this country are so indebted they can't actually roll it out in a meaningful way. And that's why Huawei could advance, right? So you start to, remember, there's mission creep in all these institutions, right? You could start saying, okay, you know what? We need stronger telecom providers. Let that deal happen.
Yeah, well, we'll see. At this point, that is not what my reporting is showing, at least from the Department of Justice side of things. Michelle, real quickly, the president likes the personal touch. He can respond positively to flattery. Any chance of the G20, Xi pulls him aside and says, come on.
Oh, yeah, I think that's possible. But I don't know that it will ultimately be meaningful. The bigger question is Chinese behavior going to change? Not just for our benefit, but for theirs and for the global economy, right? You know, they can chat all they want, but are they going to value intellectual property? Are they going to reduce government intervention? Have you seen where all the loans go now in that economy? 10 years ago, they were going to the private sector. Now they're going to the state-run enterprises that are inefficient, bloated, have political aims, have party officials within their, upper echelons.